Did you see the Michael Hastings video that was released today?
I did not, but tell me about it, because I actually am the whole Michael Hastings thing is important to me because I believe there's this small group of journalists really doing the job of journalism, and Hastings was one of them. So what did I miss? The
video of the car. They got a video of the car from a security camera accelerating down the street and then blowing up before it impacts.
No.
An explosion before the impact.
No,
and then
really?
a big explosion,
Well,
yes. The car, it looks like the car is driving, and then there's a boom, and then a boom.
So if you're
like
if you're Mercedes-Benz right now, you just have a reason all of a sudden to find out what really happened to Michael Hastings, so it's not your fault.
It's hard to tell what it is because it's not the clearest video in the world, and it's black and white. Hold on. It's black and white. It's a security camera. But it's the thing's hurling down the street, and you see this impact, and on impact, there's a boom, and then there's a giant, huge explosion.
Well, let me point this out, because this is truly the way I believe. As much as I might go there to some degree, I literally can't believe that this guy was killed by the government or anything like that. And if he was, then I don't even know what to do. Here, let me put it to you this way, though. When I try to tell myself how ridiculous...
Check out the video. Look up. Here's the video. We're playing it right now for you.
Trying to see if I can...
He's going to fly down the street and slam into a pole. And there's no brakes. Watch this. Boom, boom. See that? You see there's a boom, and then there's a boom, and there's a giant explosion. And they're a distance from each other, so it's almost like the car blows up as it's moving.
You know, here's the part that drives me crazy.
And I saw a couple cones in there, too.
I used
Cones?
You know, those little UFO things that fly. What are they called?
Oh God, he's helping the case now, Brian. No, but you know what? When I was here in L.A. in news, I worked for one of the best newsmen, old dinosaur of a guy. When I worked for him, a guy named John Babcock, won a bunch of Peabody Awards, famous news guy here. He taught me how to do news, and his general principle was, if the LAPD doesn't talk about something, boom, we open an investigation. That's all it took. We didn't have to know anything more than that. They said no comment. We were on it. As a news person, the question I have is, why aren't they? I mean, look, if you're a Kardashian, if you're some minor celebrity we shouldn't care about, we're going to find out every little thing. You know, who was the blonde chick that died in Bermuda or whatever?
Blonde chick that died? Natalie Holloway?
No. The one who was the stripper who married the rich guy. What was her name?
Who?
Oh, come on.
Stripper that married a rich guy.
I'll come up with it in a second. But, I mean, my point was, if you're some minor celebrity, the media is going to uncover every last hour of your life and the whole thing.
Right.
If you're Michael Hastings, where has the reporter been who says, here was Michael Hastings' last 12 hours?
Yeah.
Where was he 2 hours before the crash? I mean, you know, from what I've heard, the guy hadn't had a drink in 5 years, didn't do drugs or anything like that anymore. But if oh God, that girl's name is on the tip of my head, tip of my tongue. I'll come up with it in a second. But the point is that normally you would expect the media to now go run past that guy's last 12 hours, because that's going to tell you a lot about the situation, right? No one's done that.
Well,
and it's
I think
crazy that no one's done that.
Independent internet media has. I think there's been many stories written on the fact that he was responsible for, in his articles, getting generals fired.
Yeah, no question. And was working on a big story, supposedly.
Supposedly on the CIA and on Petraeus. And it had something to do with Jill Kelly and had something to do with the whole reason why he was fired in the first place, allegedly. I don't know the details behind the story.
He was regularly had his life threatened, as many good investigative reporters do. This could have been anybody. It could have been just some guy who hated him. The other thing to remember that I was starting to get to, though, is that every time I tell myself something like that's impossible from the government standpoint, there's a book called Poisoning the Press out there that's very good, and it's about do you remember Jack Anderson, the investigative reporter, used to be on Good Morning America, always had some scoop, and Britt Hume from Fox News used to be his assistant. Jack Anderson was the deepest, and he was a ham. I mean, he definitely would take these investigative stories, and I'm Jack Anderson, and this is but he uncovered stuff that messed with people so much.
Brian?
Yeah.
Apparently, there was a plan in the Nixon White House, and this is on the record, documents, I mean, nobody even debates it, where they talked about killing Jack Anderson because he was releasing sensitive information, and one of the ideas floated was to do something to his car, including putting LSD on the steering wheel so it could be absorbed by his hands. And two guys, including G. Gordon Liddy, were up for this idea and ready to go. It was President Nixon that canceled it, but I mean, that idea got well past the early planning stages. And you say to yourself, okay, if in 1972 the President of the United States is even having people discuss this, I mean, that blows my mind. Forget about talking about Michael Hastings. So you sit there and go, what's possible? I'm not the kind of guy that can go there. I just can't believe that the government would off this guy. But there are so many questions, and as a reporter, you're not supposed to go in there and say, I know what happened. Let's see if the government killed him. You're supposed to say, all right, let's see what his last 12 hours look like. Let's get some toxicology. Let's start to piece together things. Well, we have no toxicology right now. We have no statement from the LAPD. Some reporter in San Diego said that his body was returned in an urn without the family's permission to cremate them. I've heard that's not true. I actually direct messaged that woman on Twitter, that reporter, and she didn't answer me back. So I don't know what's true about that. But the point
she probably
is,
thought you were trying to get some.
Anyway, the point of the matter is that something's going on here, and as a reporter, you're supposed to go out there and begin to look into it. What bothers me is that no one is. I don't understand that, because you know why? Because it's a salacious, juicy story about a famous person. It has all of the things that, even if this wasn't, a conspiratorial type story, you would expect the media to be on just because it's a conspiratorial story.
Wouldn't you think that these people would be terrified?
Two journalists, fellow journalists, just today, about 5 hours ago, are now suing the FBI because the FBI, I think, had like 20 days to release the information that they have on Michael Hastings, and they didn't, so they went over the time period. So now these two independent reporters, or the two guys next to be shot and murdered.
What are their names?
Jason Leopold and Ryan Shapiro.
I don't know those guys.
And these guys are suing for the Freedom of Information Act.
Yeah. Yes.
They put in oh, wow.
Supposedly, Hastings' lawyer has all this information from what he was working on. How'd you like to be Hastings' lawyer right now?
Well, supposedly his girlfriend or his wife, whichever the case, is working on completing the book. Completing whatever he's working on.
Well, again, I don't like to be Mr. Conspiracy Theory. What bothers me is that when reporters don't do their job, like look into this guy's last 12 hours, it opens the door up. I mean, people are naturally now going to speculate, and you're going to get these wild theories about, Michael Hastings and the grassy knoll, which you don't have to have if the reporters can begin to debunk this. The second thing that happens, though, is did you see Wolf Blitzer was hosting some thing the other day with the generals, and I mean, he looked like he was working for the government, and you just turn around and go, okay, the next question is, do I trust journalists, in air quotes, like that to be investigating something? And so once they lose their credibility, I've got to get some, Matt Taibbi or some other guy who's a lot like Hastings to investigate him, or I'm not going to buy it.
Well, I don't believe that you can consider Wolf Blitzer to be a journalist anymore. I think
he never was a journalist. He's
a talking head.
That CNN keeps employing Wolf Blitzer. Forget the journalist part. How about he's just awful?
Yeah.
And there's nothing you can do.
Did you see the video, the really awkward video of the woman? And when he asked her about God saving her from the hurricane, she said she was an atheist. And so Doug Stanhope organized a bunch of donations for her because she said she was an atheist.
Listen, I've said before, and I'll say it again, and this is not an arrogant thing to say, and I'll explain why in a second. I could double CNN's ratings. I could just give me CNN. I will double their ratings in like 48 hours. But the only reason I can do that is because they are so awful that, the bar is so low that I could fire a few people there and their ratings would double. Wolf Blitzer's fired. I think I'll turn CNN on again and see what's going on.
I think it's very important, though, for CNN to have people that are willing to follow their agenda. Whatever their news.
Apparently, you're absolutely correct.
I don't think they're interested in getting these hard-hitting news reporters.
No, and you know how you know? Because they've cut their investigative budget down to nothing.
Well, we had Amber Lyon in, who used to work for CNN, who talked about her coverage of Bahrain. That's how she says it. Bahrain.
She did the special that they wouldn't air.
Exactly.
On CNN International.
And it was because they wanted to be able to park their military there in case some shit went down with Iran. So they wanted to sort of squash all this dissent and all this. So they essentially put together what was like a tourism piece.
But this is how, and this takes us right to Snowden, because this is where the government has managed, and this has been going on a lot longer than we think, because they used to say in the 50s and 60s that the CIA has a person in every newsroom in America. So this has been something that's been going on for a while. But in the 70s, they were breaking lots of stories that the intelligence agencies did not like. Yeah. And as a news person, that's how you know news is working. When the government and the intelligence agencies and all these people that classify stuff are mad as hell at the news media news media is doing its job. When the news media is defending those agencies and not releasing the information, that's when you throw up your hands and go, and going after. I mean, listen, there are people that don't like Glenn Greenwald's personality. They don't like a lot about him. They think he's a grandstander, all these kind of things. But what Glenn Greenwald did is what reporters are supposed to do. And when you watch reporters slam Glenn Greenwald or Michael Hastings, he took such crap from other reporters because he reported stuff that they wouldn't report because they didn't want to burn a source. That's when you go, wait a minute, your priorities are totally screwed up if you're worried about telling the American people important things because your source might not talk to you anymore.
Well, you know the Breitbart story.
I do.
I don't like getting conspiratorial.
Speaking of guys who aren't reporters, though, I mean, that drives me nuts.
He wasn't a reporter.
I know, it drives me nuts.
But what's weird about the story is that the guy has a heart attack and then his coroner gets poisoned. The guy's coroner
was the
dies.
Coroner poisoned or did he die?
What happened? Pretty sure it was poison. Let's read it.
Sounds a little conspiratorial.
It does, right there. But listen. Right away to your reaction, which is fascinating. Well, you're talking about a guy who's maybe releasing very sensitive information about very powerful people, and you're like, that sounds conspiratorial.
Well, it does,
but it's a natural inclination. I'm not saying you're incorrect.
I think a good reporter, not that I am, but I can see one when I know him when I see him. A good reporter is supposed to be a little skeptical, but still follow the leads. You don't want a reporter that says, I bet John F. Kennedy wasn't killed by Oswald. Let's go look in that. You want a guy who says, okay, there are some questions. I'm going to follow the trail of evidence and see where it leads me. And a good, healthy skepticism is good for a reporter on both sides. You don't want to take anybody's word for anything. At the same time, you don't want to be a nut. You don't want to go off into fantasy land.
He's dead from arsenic. His coroner was killed from arsenic.
Okay, well, that is a little weird.
What the fuck, man? The 2 months after Breitbart's passing, the coroner that investigated the cause of death.
Are you on Breitbart's website, though?
Arsenic. No, this is
Monsanto.
RT.com.
Okay, well, again,
are they bullshit?
No, they're just not. Totally. I mean, RT will play some stories that are good and real, but they'll also play some stuff where you go, oh, God, don't do that. You're ruining what little credibility. But it's RT.
Are they sketch?
No, they're a little bit sketch.
Don't lie to me,
Little bit sketch.
Okay.
Sometimes
we
good,
have Abby Martin on August 5th.
They have some good. And you know what? I feel like they're in the process, just like Al Jazeera was, of moving from sketch to not so sketch anymore. It's an evolution. So it depends.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's interesting that
trying to be more credible.
Some of the hard-hitting stories are coming from Russian Times.
Well, again, though, because the stupid American media is leaving the door wide open. If they were doing real journalistic, it's a little like saying, you know, when the football players went on strike and the NFL goes on strike, and all of a sudden you're watching guys who couldn't play in the NFL were working at restaurants, but that's all you have. That's the analogy. Is that all of a sudden the NFL's on strike or not? We're doing its job, so we're watching football players who go, "Hey, he's a pretty good running back." That's because he's not up against Eric Dickerson. You don't have anything to compare it to. So our media is not doing its job. So when anybody looks like they're even kind of doing the job of real journalism, it looks great by comparison.
That's a very interesting analogy, and that's a mixed martial arts analogy as well, as lower organizations when fighters look spectacular and then they fight in the UFC and get crushed.
Or boxing was that way.
Time.
You know, this guy looks great, but who's he fought? You know.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good point. It's a really interesting point. It's with the whole thing. It's very strange, man. We live in one of the weirdest times to be alive, but I guess that's always been the case. People have always lived in the weirdest times to be alive.
That's a good. And you know what? That's what I try to remember is that the way we, in general, on a cellular level, feel is the way it's always been. Where you kind of go, God, this is really strange. What's that old Chinese proverb? May you live in interesting times, right? And it's a double-edged sword, exactly. And that's always been the case. And you know, some Roman was going, those Germans are so weird. And man, God, it's a strange time to be alive.
And when you see things like this Hastings thing, and with your deep knowledge of history and all the crazy shit that people have done, from didn't one of the fucking sons get poisoned? One of Genghis Khan's son, who might not have really been his son, didn't they kill him?
Yeah, they think so. They don't know. Again,
they don't know.
The Mongols weren't exactly keeping scrupulous records about these things.
But what's really shocking to us is that in this day and age, I mean, let's just go on a big fucking crazy tinfoil hat limb. If they did kill Michael Hastings, it's amazing that they can still do that. Like, they get busted for cheating, like they get busted for having an affair with some chick who's threatening some other chick, you know, and then the FBI is actually going after the CIA. There's all this exchange of information, but someone can still do that.
To me, the most interesting, you know, when you talk about history and what could be the weirdest thing that happened, if that information became confirmed and we knew for a fact, let's pretend 100% somehow it comes out and we know the government killed Michael Hastings, the reality changes, like in a 9/11, 180, all of a sudden, all bets are off.
Absolutely, but
and
here's the
everything
problem
weird
with that
starts
statement.
happening.
This, in quotes, the government. Is it the government, or is it a small group of people
but that's
inside
what
the
I mean.
military that stand to like really be damaged by one of his stories?
That's the door that gets opened. I mean, if this happens, then everything. Then you go, okay, the president has to comment, the Congress has to comment, the investigation, and then the big war starts between information versus no information versus we have national security. Michael, if you knew what we knew about what Michael Hastings was about to report, you'd have killed him yourself. I mean, it's going to get to be that kind of thing. But I'm not a little asterisk. I just can't see that. but if it happened, it would change everything.
Yeah, it would.
It would be like finding out that John F. Kennedy was killed. Here's the gunman's name. He was hired by the Johnson administration or whatever. The world changed, and that's why the conspiracy nuts and the Kennedy thing, they can't give that up because, like Oliver Stone, a lot of his worldview is based on the idea that is what happened. Therefore, this government is the government that did that. You know, a whole bunch of dominoes start falling. If you find out something in the government with official sanction killed Michael Hastings, the world is different, and everybody would have to people would have to start answering questions. We would have to start discussing it. Wolf Blitzer might have to mention it on the news.
He's not going to mention it.
I know he's not going to mention it.
He's going to dance around it one way or another.
Don't you think we should have killed? Isn't the Michael Hastings thing a boon for society? Don't you think? Shouldn't he have been killed? Shouldn't he have been killed sooner? We'll take a poll. CNN poll says he should have been killed 2 years ago before. Well, listen to Geraldo.
Very interesting. CNN poll.
Geraldo Rivera said, well, I feel very sorry for Michael Hastings' family, but let's not forget he took down our greatest fighting general.
Did he really say that?
Oh, my God. He repeated it.
Did he really say that?
Yes. Well, look, while we're talking about people who aren't really journalists. So.
Well, he used to be.
No.
Remember that he was the reason why the...
No,
well, okay,
I never went there. Never.
Do you know that he was the reason why the Zapruder film was released?
Maybe.
The Zapruder film was released on the Geraldo Rivera show with Dick Gregory in the 1970s. I think it was 73.
I think that was a new version of it. I don't.
No.
Because I don't think Geraldo Rivera had a show in the 1970s.
He did.
Okay, I'll take your word for it. I was watching the Monkees.
I've watched the video. I've watched the video of the show. It's
I thought they just had a different angle.
No, they showed it for the first time on television. People got a chance to see what really happened. You get to see the shot.
I will not debate what I don't know.
He was a conspiracy theorist. We'll play it. And we'll end with this.
I believe you.
We'll end with Geraldo with Dick Gregory on his show showing the Zapruder film because it's fascinating. Because it's also a time machine into the past. But before we end with this hardcore history. You got if you don't have this on your iPod or your phone or your Android, go get that shit.